Welcome to the 2025 podcast. This is our first podcast in 2025. So, myself, Kriti, and this is Chetan and Guru. Yes, sir. So, we'll be starting off with the podcast. So, sir, there's been a lot happening at Coco and especially outside the legal space. So, basically, the QFIN and the Synapt seem to be making more of waves. So, what's the perspective of yours on this, sir?
I think before we get into this, I think 2025 started with a big bang, correct? Yeah. Both in terms of AI and the events across AI and also events at Coco, correct?
That's right.
And I think we should sort of like give viewers a perspective about what's happening in the AI world. I'm sure people have heard of DeepSeek and what's come out of China
Right.
and how it is open source and it's cheaper and can beat so many things and things like that. So, I mean, where we left off with Code and Counsel in 2024 was we were not even at an O1 level, correct? When it came to sort of OpenAI and things like that. But I mean, just to give viewers a perspective, in terms of large language models, in the size of these, if you go to Hugging Face, Guru, or if you generally investigate, you'll find a few large players, right? You've got obviously OpenAI, which is open or closed source, depends on whom you ask, right? If you ask Elon Musk, he will say, I'm sure it's open source. But anyway, there's Claude by Anthropic. The 3.5 Sonnet is a superb LLM, correct? And then you've got Mistral, then you've got Microsoft's Phi, some math specific models. There are many, correct, for all of these things. And then you have the ability to run some of these locally, using Olama or whatever you need. QFIN. I mean, by the way, China also has its own models. You've got QFIN, you've got DeepSeek V2, which came out, and there were hints around some of these things as well. But what's happened, I believe, is, depending on how you encode the LLM, correct, it can either be text generation or a reasoning LLM.
Right.
And most of the OpenAI ones are reasoning LLMs and things like these, right? So, and what DeepSeek has come up is potentially an O1 competitor. And you remember, Guru, I told you like the day it got launched saying that I tested this and I thought that, it may or may not be production ready yet, at least, from where we are looking at things, and we might need something much more, and I thought that, my first inclination was OpenAI still had a lot of edge over some of these things from a production perspective in terms of our products and things like that. Why I'm giving this context is how things have changed. You've suddenly gone from a paid model deployed only on Azure and to a fully open source model where you can deploy on your servers, provided you have the ability to sort of like deploy these. But most people don't also realize saying that if I want to, I mean, you have different quantized versions of DeepSeek as well, correct? You may be able to run like a 1.2 billion on a local comp with say an 8-core GPU, but if you want the full length, if you want like the 64 billion, whatever they've done it with, correct, or 72, you need some really powerful machines, correct? So it's not something which saying, is it production ready? Is it something that you can sort of like immediately adopt? I would not necessarily sort of like immediately jump at some of these things, correct? It really depends on the context, correct?
Then definitely takes some time to understand how the models are performing, how it can be used for certain applications, etc. But at least DeepSeek has been a ground breaking, and it shatters everything, even the mindsets of people. Oh, you need a lot of resources to train a model. Oh, it's not possible for anyone outside the Europe or the USA to develop models. That's something that got shattered. Going in the direction, I think,
Yeah.
So,
But this I was talking to a VC recently, and I mentioned this saying, and I had read somewhere saying, and it was a proper sort of like encapsulation of the moment, saying, an LLM has become a commodity, correct?
right.
And it's basically on top of what you build is what really matters. And on top of what you build is essentially like a wrapper, but you don't need a VC to run a wrapper. right? You don't need it. Right? It requires an adoption. That's what I think. That's what we've done for Coco for a long time. But so does it change the mechanics overnight? Saying, does it make it accessible? Is it something that I can do it before DeepSeek? Maybe not at a level of a reasoning model, but there were others as well, which did the tasks pretty competently. Correct. We have benchmarked. We have got our own QLLM, which we did it. We did not need a huge quantized model to be utilized. We trained on some things, and we thought that whatever the current state of requirements are, from a user in a production scenario perspective, is more than sufficient with what we have now. Correct. Now, if you're looking at a PhD level economics, just yesterday, OpenAI came up with something where if you're a GPT Pro user spending like $200 a month, you've got like a PhD level output window that it generates.
Can give you research reports and all this.
Yeah, but then human ingenuity is something that you may not be able to replace. And I think DeepSeek, the way if you read that paper and the way that they've gone about sort of like adopting a non-CUDA architecture to be able to even sort of like develop that model, gone about sort of like used a very different way of looking at things. Correct. As you know, like if you're using GPUs, these are usually NVIDIA ones. The reason why AMD is also being left behind is the world adopts CUDA architecture for base level programming, and you don't find the same adoption in AMD or say an Intel GPU kind of like a scenario, right? So now we've gone about and created something else, correct, which can work in parallel. It looks at CUDA as a separate, or if it looks at a GPU as a separate sort of like an entity from which it can tap in and tap out. I mean, this is at a very simplistic level, not that also that I'm an expert at how they have come about doing this, but this involves sort of like some element of deep research, correct? But how does this all sort of like add up? And to Kriti's question, correct, saying got a lot of things that are coming up, and what is it? We've got some new products also coming up, correct? And what is it that she mentioned? QFIN and Synapt. So just to give users an overview, if you go to our website, www.coco.com, then at that point in time, you will sort of, there are links to non-legal tech applications. So QFIN is a set of financial agents, almost 30 or 32 of them, that we built using our expertise on QBot that solves things like financial consolidation across subsidiaries, as an example. Correct? It's a huge problem. And also, especially in large enterprises, it also works with audit sort of with auditing requirements in mind. So there are quite a few. You can also visit the subsite qfin.guru in Guru's honor. So and then look at it. Synapt is also an agentic AI process. We can assist with some custom development of agentic AI, very specific to a company's requirements as well. During development of QBot, if you remember, QBot is specific to legal tech in terms of having a conversational interface for legal specific data sets, right? So you've got QFIN, which is also agentic AI, not exactly in the same lines of QBot, but Synapt goes a little bit further, correct, and uses different models and different agents to be able to accomplish a number of different things as well. QFIN is advanced in the sense that it contains a lot of technology and a lot of different LLMs to be able to accomplish what it does. When you're doing financial apps, as you know, Guru or agents, the accuracy is a lot more
very important.
Yeah, important, correct. You try and run a Llama 3.2 latest on a mathematical sort of like reasoning, it doesn't do well, correct. So and it's not, I mean, we mentioned Llama, but it depends on and we have our own thoughts around these. I don't want to make these because some of these are proprietary in how we test on these things as well. If you remember in the early days of GPT-2, you could convince the GPT that 2 equals 1 or 2 equals 0, and you could just sort of like load it up with so many things that it not
logical questions
would be there. But I wanted to give users the ability to try out Synapt and QFIN. These are cutting edge agentic AI and fintech specific products. These are as cutting edge as probably DeepSeek, when it comes to functional sort of like use cases. And we believe like we are the first ones in the world sort of like create all of these things as well. And by the way, with QFIN, we can integrate into a number of different architectures in terms of also integrations, things like these, so that you can just plug and play. So this is our new thing, saying QFIN and Synapt are new things for Poco and developed by utilizing the know-how of how we do things on the legal tech side. And I wish some of you. And by the way, Guru, you want to speak about how enterprises are sort of like adopting these two things as well. Very recently,
Yeah, definitely. Recently, we had a demo to with a very large company when they were looking at various use cases wherein they can read documents, extract information, how to put them into their own ERP systems, etc., and how they can use it because most of these activities have been manual for them, and they have seen the demo of some of these applications, and they have found them to be very interesting.
yeah.
So yeah, so,
And on that was on QFIN side, correct? And that is probably going to deployment soon, as we know, correct? And also for Synapse, we had the opportunity to demonstrate a very large, financial services company that the work being done by about 24 analysts, is essentially sort of like can be automated to an extent with a lot more efficiency and also urgency as they require, correct? It could execute tasks within, say, a 20-25 minute window, which is like an eternity in computer processing times, correct? Which people would take 24 people would take like a month to execute, essentially, right? So it's reaching a phase saying, it is possible to sort of like bring in a lot of efficiency, cost savings, right, into the process. Not that that the human element is taken out of the mix, correct? But the human element can be focused on better tasks of analyzing what comes out of it, rather than trying to dig for the information yourself.
right.
I think the better way to do this is, if you remember Alta Vista Group, which was the forerunner of Google, correct? If you try to run search on Alta Vista, it used to be a big thing, right? Saying that you are able to sort of like look at stuff and search for it. I think that is the use case in many enterprises right now. So the way they do things is at least about 35 to 40 years old. It has not been changed, and for a long time. And when you expose on these things, basically like it's a paradigm shift in thinking, saying, oh, there are better ways to do things, because as technology advances, reallocate resources, time, and money, correct, for all of these things as well. So that is how some of the agentic AI systems are also sort of like scaling up. But sorry, it's a long-winded and sort of like a long monotone from my
We
side.
just also want to add how much we are using these applications in our day-to-day activities.
Yeah.
That's an important thing to highlight also.
I think within Coco and Kriti, you need to speak how you're using some of the agents that you have, correct, in your day-to-day work as well, correct?
So related to that, sir, like you mentioned, like DeepSeek and O1. So I'm hearing many things from them. Many people, like they're comparing both of them. Like, what's the main difference between both of them, like DeepSeek and O1?
I think basically DeepSeek is also trained on on OpenAI LLMs, or responses. They claim that only about 830 of them were used. To sort of like train 830 responses from an API was used to train DeepSeek, correct, to the level, correct. They use a different way in which they use reinforced learning, correct.
And they use a method called mixture of experts. Basically, they develop a smaller. It's like developing smaller LLMs and integrating them into a bigger umbrella. And based on the question that you ask, it basically activates that particular agent, which gives you the more pointed response. That's how.
So would it be right to say, Guru, is like, I remember rote learning. Nowadays in schools, it is not encouraged. But let's say you were to rote learn tables from 1 to 20, correct? That is used to basically develop your first language model, correct? And then you know how to multiply, right? Then you teach a child or a computer to go to the 21st table or the 35th table, correct?
Right.
And then you extend it, and then it figures out that you can do it, for infinity, correct, as well, correct? So, and the way that you can learn the table is multiple ways. You can do an addition, you can do a multiplication, correct? You can use squared methods, depending on. So our DeepSeek basically it has explored one of the methods similar to this, in which it's like a thinking method. Is that right, Guru? Is that the
So
right
another
phrase?
way of looking at it is, let us say there's a closed room in which there are multiple experts. There is a finance guy, there's a marketing, there is a sales guy, and there, all these different types of people. Now you're asking a question standing outside the room, and you'll get the correct answer because the person who is actually having expertise in that field is going to answer you. So that's basically how
When you are able to sort of like, but earlier you would use instruction based sort of like, you would have to change the context for an LLM through prompting to sort of like put it in a different frame and make sure that. But now even LLMs have also sort of like you have the ability to add memory. So it's all, and also one of the things is, if you use, for instance, like 3.5, the early version of not the turbo one, correct? As an example from OpenAI, correct? It would quickly lose context, right? And then it forget what. So some of those things are being tackled on a
much better
on a much better
latest
basis.
models for sure.
And
They have larger context windows. They have better token sizes.
Okay, I will come to that. I have my own things on that, correct? But
DeepSeek also, like, is it like very hard to implement in the local production?
Yeah, I have my own views on this, correct? Do you want to go first, Guru, or should I?
No, go ahead. Carry on.
Okay, so see, when you deploy locally, correct, you're assuming that you have servers, correct, which are capable of running an LLM. So let us say you remember the logarithmic scale in school, correct? So you have, let's take the number 2. You have 2 squared, 2 cubed, 2 to the power of 4, 2 to the power of 8, so on, right? So if you take 2 squared, you'll get a smaller number. If you take 2 to the power of 8, it's going to be large. If you take 2 to the power of 0, it becomes infinite, correct? Or 1 to the power of 0 or 0, whatever thing is. So, but what the point being that these are all quantizations, correct? So the larger, so you can take a very big model and take a sample of it, and you can run it on a smaller level computer. It only is like, I only know 2 to the power of 2, correct? But if you take 2 to the power of 64 or whatever, I'm just simplifying this, you have a very large number. To be able to compute, you do 2 to the power of 64 on your calculator app on your computer. It'll give you an error, it'll give you an infinity error, correct? So, because beyond a certain point, the floating points, it goes beyond it goes beyond the FPU's ability to sort of like create such a large number, correct? But what happens is at that scale you have a lot more information easily, which is not compressed. So from the LLM's perspective, you can access that information. There was a visualization from China about how an LLM sort of like operates different layers, correct? And how it's able to train and figure out what it is, right? In an uncompressed model, it has access to all of these, and it basically depends on the GPU's power to sort of like chunk out and be able to arrive at a computation that makes sense, correct? So it is like dealing with uncompressed files and dealing with compressed files. And if you need to deal with a compressed file, it's going to take time for you to extract, open it. It may not have the same color accuracy. It may have removed a bunch of repeating repeating logos versus repeating colors as an example in a graphic and things like that, right? But in an uncompressed format, correct? It's got every pixel is a representation of an actual graphic, correct? So the while our video editors, as an example, color accuracy is very, very critical for them. So they'll have to deal with uncompressed formats. And when you actually view this podcast, it's a compressed version of whatever it is. It's not the original, right? Similar to LLMs, you'll have differences in quality when you run all of these things as well. Now, back to your question, saying, is it easy to run all of these things? Why I said is, if you want to run the uncompressed version, it's going to take some very serious hardware. The infrastructure you need to have the proper servers, the GPUs, the data storage, and it's also a question of how fast all of these can do a token output, correct? If you are in a production grade environment where people let's say you get a token output of 20 tokens, correct? But your output window is 6,000 tokens. How long is it going to take you if you get 20 tokens per second?
Right.
To fill out something which is 6,000 tokens. And each token, is about 13, 14 letters, correct? On an average, right? So it's going to take some time, correct? If you use our products, if you take Coco products, it's literally instantaneous, correct? Because we have the infrastructure to run some of these things as well. But the short answer is, unless you have the hardware necessary to run all of these things, and the hardware keeps progressing, correct? It's not that older hardware can't run or newer hardware is on the way forward. It really depends on what kind of application that you want and to whom you're catering to. For someone who is is able to wait, correct, then it is not mission critical, then you can wait, maybe it'll land in your inbox 1 hour later, as an example,
or run it overnight and present the results maybe the next day or something.
That may be a case where you may want to run this on older servers, slower servers, things like these. But then if you want to run this production grade environment, conforming to Gen Z standards of wanting everything instantaneously, right? Then you need something very, very spontaneous and very, very powerful
infrastructure.
Yeah. I think that's
very much.
So. And also to add to that, but see, depending on what you run, if you run things locally, you're also limited by something called an output window size. Correct. It really depends once again on the infrastructure.
Yeah.
You can change that, but most stuff running locally, if you use open source stuff to be able to run them locally, limited about 2,000 tokens. But the 2,000 tokens takes forever to generate also, depending on the hardware, correct? And if you want like an OpenAI research tool, correct, to generate like 15 pages, it's going to take time. Even for OpenAI, it will take time, correct?
It's easily some 15 minutes, 10 minutes kind of.
Even for them, with those kind of, and if some of those things, I don't think locally you can run. You need like an entire server farm, correct, to be able to be able to handle complex tasks. Also, for shorter things, like you want a conversational bot as a fancy to run locally, I think it's great to have a locally running LLM. But anything more where, as an example, correct, we have like Diligence project, or we have a product called Diligence, where it can review so many things together and basically, come at a conclusion or help you arrive at a conclusion or an analysis on a transaction, as an example, correct? It may not be possible to run it with current output windows. It's like getting cut off mid-sentence. Okay, so you'll get a report, but what's going to happen is the computer is going to wait for some time for this output to come through. Then the computer will wait for the time allotted and then say, okay, this is it. And then it has to complete the task, correct? You're dealing with at the end of the day, a machine, correct? The machine has like a start loop and an end loop, and this is essentially how it works in real life. But that's what I think, Guru. But Guru is a lot more.
Completely agree with you. Yeah, so different use cases, it all depends on the use cases that you are working with. You want a repository kind of a tool where an AI repository like our legacy, where you can upload your documents and you expect the documents to be available maybe next day or a couple of days later. So we can use local models with a very high level of quantization.
Correct.
But then, if you want instantaneous results, a chatbot or some of those other use cases, some of these things may not be suited for the use case, basically.
Correct. So maybe that is the long and short of it, saying
Yeah,
the higher the quantization level, the lower the quality that it becomes, correct?
yeah.
And the lower the hardware requirements.
Speaking of this infrastructure, so like Google's been doing some cool things, like micro data centers, like through Q4. Like, what's your perspective on this? Like, it's doing like this micro things.
So I think, when Guru and I were doing, when we, so this has got a history to it as well, correct? And we just discussed how difficult it is to sort of, run some of these things, right? You also, you either have like an Ambani's scale, hundreds of acres kind of a data center that is yet to be built versus, you have public cloud like Microsoft or AWS. And Guru is an expert, correct, at, and I always tease Guru saying he's always over budget by 5x, correct, if he uses the cloud, right? And that's really, and what takes up is, let's say you're training a model. Guru, my training set the other day, correct, was 6 MB, correct, but it took, if I put it through a public cloud in India, it cost us almost 55,000 rupees, correct? Just on, I mean, there were some, it was cleaned, it was done something, I wanted some special stuff on it or whatever the case is, right? It never got, and then after having burned through all that, it came back saying that there's an error in the file which it could not compute, correct? So it's not very easy to sort of like use public cloud infrastructure, though everyone claims it's very easy to train your model or clean your data set and collate the data set and all of these things, right? And it's very, very expensive, right? And for an infra company like Coco, correct? And Coco is focused on legal tech, and we have different use cases, and sometimes you may have data privacy restrictions from utilizing data. And if you look at all the LLMs right now, correct, they're very focused on the US as a law, correct? Because if you want India specific stuff, correct, you'll have to create those data sets yourself. And India is so unique that in legal, correct, as an example, it uses the US templates, it uses the UK templates, it uses India templates, all the common law stuff, correct? But if you want to create India specific templates, there's, it's only, and if you ask a human to do it, a lawyer to do it today, let's say to draft an agreement, they have an inherent bias to it because they're only trained on documents outside of India, correct?
Yeah.
So the endeavor is to remove the bias in some of the LLMs that we have, correct? An example of bias is using English to do this podcast. We could have done it in any other Indian language, which we know, correct? But so those kind of biases come in. Okay. So to remove that and clean all of these things take a lot of time, effort, energy, and it's not that you can simply have data, put it together, and do a chatbot. We've seen those days where it gives you like rubbish results, also, isn't it, Guru? Yeah. And when you do it, there's a requirement. We also have some patent technology where it's not necessary to always train, but I won't get into very big details on that. It is, of course, our internal IP for all of these things as well. But suffice it to say that if you're putting through all of these different bits and pieces, you're going to consume a lot of power. You're going to consume a lot of computing data. And on private cloud, correct? Sorry, on public cloud, you will burn a lot of these things. And I don't know how many people are successful in getting you'll still get a Tesla T4. You'll never get a H100 and beyond, isn't it? You will not get an allocation. Correct. You'll simply not get an allocation. And also, if you're looking at India, correct, the concept is all about services. It's never been about products and innovation. Correct. People underestimate, it's like trying to get a chartered accountant, correct? You will get one, sorry for all, all due disclaimers on this, correct? You will get somebody depending on how much you pay, and you will get, it's like across the spectrum. And this is true of lawyers as well, and true. But India is such a services denominated economy, correct? That the innovation piece and the ability to actually do deep research and do deep things is underestimated. Correct.
Right.
So, we've got a new product on the hardware side called QCore, correct? I think about 2 years back, correct, Guru, or about a year and a half back, we started experimenting with edge devices, perfected it, correct? It was very difficult to get. We were probably the first to get, and we told NVIDIA about it, saying that, we are running, actual LLMs on edge devices, which we had a very specific use case. I don't want to get into that, but it was possible to run tasks on. And at that point in time, NVIDIA was the only company that made a GPU on an edge device, right? So available. So, and still does. It's like many people say I'll run it on Raspberry Pi. I'm like, go ahead, try, see what you get like 2 tokens a second, you'll be happy, correct? So, but that it's an edge device is not a Raspberry Pi, correct? So, and an edge device needs to have certain amount of output capacity to be able to run some of these things as well, and it needs to take into account concurrency, network availability, and so many other things as well, correct? Sorry, I'm getting a little technical here, but that's how we started, correct? And the damn thing would consume so much power also. It's not that an edge device, is so energy efficient and things. It's like running an old style filament light bulb at 200 watts, correct? So something like that. So, and that can consume a lot of power very, very quickly. And the devices get hot because it's not necessary that you have cooling systems you run it in a place in summer in India without adequate cooling, that thing will just smoke, correct? So after some time. So we've gone through all of these. I've burnt a few things also, isn't it? So it's happened as well. And why I mention this is when QCode is a data center, it's a micro data center where you can run your applications and inference tasks very, very quickly, correct? Because it's made for application, and you know what the output levels look like, and it can scale to a certain number of users and things like that. And it has certain power capacity and tier one networks associated with it. It is not meant to become like a huge data center, because in India, people, the moment you go to a very huge data center, correct, and the problem becomes one of cooling, of management, of power, and then tier four data centers, you need to have at least two power sources. In India, unless you're in what do you call as a Gadibaga, which is a border area, correct? You will not have power supply from two discoms, correct?
Yeah.
Electricity boards. Most states in India have only one discom, correct? So where will you get the second discom for? Right. The second discom is the sun, correct? So, and that's also limited to approximately 12 hours a day, and it's never going to run at like a gigawatt capacity and all that, correct? It's not going to happen. So you have to do, I think in most places, you can do like a tier two, and there are different tiers of data centers, not that it's bad or whatever. You'll have a tier two or a tier T capability as well, correct? And a tier three is quite adequate, to be able to run what you require. You don't necessarily need to pay for hundreds of acres and of to run like cutting. You need micro data centers, correct?
Yeah. In addition to it, I just also want to add that we want to charge our customers in rupees instead of dollars.
Exactly.
Right?
Correct.
If you look at Azure or AWS or any other cloud, yeah, so you pay them in dollars, but then those charges have to be transferred to the customers. No,
Yeah,
that's something
I think you're right, Guru, isn't it? It's a joke, right? People sitting in the next road in Bangalore will charge you in dollars.
That's
correct, which we think is a joke. People buy it also,
right.
correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So yesterday I was talking to someone in Chennai, correct? They are very sitting in Madras and trying to sort of like charge me in dollars, correct? What's the fun, correct? You have just adopted some. And if you look at the USDT to INR, it's indicating a 92.
Yeah.
It soon becomes unaffordable in India.
Correct.
And it's a services economy. How many people actually innovate, Guru, that you need such huge data centers?
Right. Correct.
You think about it, right? Does it make sense, right?
It's making way for the US-based companies to take over the Indian companies.
And also, to a large extent, data center is a real estate and power play. Correct. You need to have the real estate to be able to have scale, and you need to have power to be able to run it.
Okay.
Now, how many 1 gigawatt stations, or data centers are there in India, Guru? At least to my knowledge, zero, right? You'll top out at say 250 or 300 kVA and things like that, right? That's the max that you can. I stand corrected on some of these things, but to get a gigawatt of power, correct, requires like, can you imagine the power supply for some? I mean, you need to have like a coal-based
Nuclear
power source, correct?
Yeah.
Fusion is something which the Chinese and the French have not yet perfected, so it's not yet come to India yet, correct? So
We have our own teams working on it.
yeah, hopefully, it's like we have our own internal jokes, but I feel that for product companies, especially in the AI space in India, and who do deep research, correct? I think you will need these micro data centers. I think the government has an ambitious plan of procuring thousands of GPUs. And anyway, NVIDIA's annual event is coming up, so we will know that there's going to be another major technological leap, correct? And India wants to subsidize GPU usage at what, 64 rupees an hour, correct? That is the thing. But I am asking people saying, well, that may be an approach towards availability, correct, and affordability, right? And who are the people who are building these applications?
Right.
People
Yeah,
are
actually
only building
closer.
wrappers, right? Who's actually doing the deep tech, Guru? I mean, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of very less number of amount of research is happening in India, particularly.
Very, very less amount of research. Now, what would you do with a grasshopper scale, GPU, and one rack is probably enough to run so many things. I read a report today that India's fastest supercomputer has 800 GPUs in it. Correct. Now that may be older scale, whatever it is. We know we've been to enough stuff to. If you go to a Taiwanese trade show or an NVIDIA show, correct, for some of these things, you will have some rack servers, correct, fully contained ones that can probably run like quarter of India, isn't it? In terms of just a small rack. It's no longer about like having acres and acres and acres. The computing has reached such an extent. It's like what 2 or 3 nanometers, right? Even the CPU sizes, the GPU sizes, and the ability to sort of like collate or meld. The technology has reached a stage where you can, with what GPU, right? I mean, if you look at the grasshopper versions, correct, Guru, they basically take like 2 dice and then meld in the GPU, correct? And they have the ability to sort of like really, it's not as simple as just taking these two. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying, but if you really look at the technology and the ability to interconnect all of these things, the ability, to be able to sort of have the bandwidth in the GPU to process so much, correct? It is decreasing day by day. There have been examples. People say, I can run LLMs, correct, with say so many tokens per second on interconnected Apple Mac Minis, correct? Correct. And we are on the 4th version now, M4 Pros. But the M2 Pro has more bandwidth and more cores per GPU, correct, than the M4, right? So you'll be looking at that kind of throughput. It's not necessarily like the older generation is bad and therefore cannot provide. It's more in terms of what is the use case, what does it require to run all of these things, and do you require some huge things to be able to do this, right? But what is the use case in India for this group? We look at Ola Krutim, which probably was the first to sort of like create. I mean, how many users are there to sort of like do all of these things, right? The question is, you build a wrapper, you don't need the kind of
Complete model.
you don't need it. And India is at the level of creating rappers, correct? India is not at a deep tech level. And that's the point, correct? And the deep tech, and that leads to another question, correct? Which, before we started recording this podcast, correct, came up saying, why does this happen that you cannot innovate necessarily? It's not that people don't innovate. At a base level, if you're looking at someone like me who's running a company, correct, the skill level of people that you get sometimes, and sorry to say, it's at an abysmal level. It is not, people will say, oh, where are the jobs? There are enough jobs, right, Priti? And you've been through all of these, you're the thing. It's just that the skill levels have not sort of like reached a level which or the knowledge levels, right? And there's a gap for this. And there's a huge gap. Correct. Now, can the government simply invent the jobs, correct, to give to people? Like if I tell people, sit and configure a GA for a particular web property, people look at me like this. And technology has been there for 25 years. Correct. If you think about it, 20 years at least, maybe not 25. Right. So, and there are things like this, right, which the industry, there's a huge gap between what an industry requires and the skill deficit. And don't you agree, Guru? I mean, it's like in this particular episode, I seem to have gathered the most for all of these things, but these are all things which I thought that, if I'm doing this, I might as well say it out loudly also, isn't it? Saying today the government calls out for all these people to build like a huge GPU cluster, which is anyway going to get outdated by the time it's going to sort of like come up through. And then you want to build India-specific LLMs where there's a huge skill deficit for people trying to figure out. When we built QLLM, I put out a LinkedIn post saying we were laughed at, Guru. We did not even have the resources, right? But we would sort of like use ingenious methods, putting so many things together to get things running, correct? And that seems to be the real question mark, saying, one, are you at a skill level where you can do all of these wonderful things? The answer is absolutely not, correct? Are you at a skill level as a country, correct, to do services? Absolutely, correct. Are you at a skill level to build products? Absolutely not, correct. So I think that sums it up, isn't it, Guru? In fact, when we go and sort of like do stuff internationally, correct? With our innovation, sometimes people are surprised saying, are you in India? Why not come here? Why not move here? All of those things are just sort of like given out. But if you look at most of the companies that exist today, they're just copies of things that have come up.
Yes.
Correct? It's just copies of stuff that has come out. Now, where is the innovation there? Is the innovation in the UI because it looks nicer? My app looks nicer than yours, kind of stuff, which is not innovation at the end of the day, right? Is the innovation in getting things sort of like delivered on time, correct? You've got a huge population which is jobless, correct? But therefore utilizing. But then where is the real, where is the real Vishweshwaraya moment where you can, build a dam, or you can really think of maybe, early 1900s by the British, where the Maharaja of Mysore decided to sort of like give a grant to open IISc, or maybe the scientists at ISRO, correct, that really sort of like innovate, correct, to get things done. Maybe not saying that it doesn't exist, maybe in certain portions, correct, where some of these things come up, but can we still do like booster the rocket that comes back and hitches itself to the launch pad? No, we're not there yet, correct? So that requires some amount of innovation, some amount of skilling, some amount of dedication to actually take the country forward as well, correct? The easiest thing is to sort of like leave the country, go outside and try and do something, because you don't need a lot of resources to be able to build, but you certainly at some points, I don't think there has ever, have you ever faced a situation where we could not buy or do something good?
No, there's always, I think the difference also is in the mindset.
Yeah.
Okay, to build a LLM, we need only big companies like OpenAI or Microsoft or Google, etc. But then came DeepSeek and it shattered all the.
And also early attempts were made here also saying, we only need like a mini LLM. Why should we need a proper LLM, or why should we do this? we are a services thing. I'm X company. I've got 3 lakh people doing services. The power of AI. I don't need to say more, correct? But the early attempts were made to sort of like also hijack the headlining on things like these as well, correct? It requires a certain amount of also brute sort of brute headedness, to be able to sort of like say, I'm doing this for whatever it may be. It may or may not turn out to be monetarily successful. It may or may not, but it certainly gives you. I think, Guru, can you also say that in the last year we worked on such critical technology that has given us so much happiness, correct? That we actually sat and built this. This can only come from when you actually built something, correct? When you invent something new, when you're not just imported stuff and trying to sell it here. This is not like an import-export business where you import some clothes and try and sell it here, correct? It's not. Not that it's a bad thing, okay? A joke, like very recently, we asked for some Exim Bank support, correct? To name a particular banking institution and the state of affairs, saying, I need some support in this part of the globe because we're doing here, but it usually gets delayed because of the country's tax policies and things like that. So the answer we got back literally was, if you're a chappal manufacturer, we can help you. I'm like, this is the place this is where Made in India currently stands, correct? And this is where the state of affairs is when it comes to innovation. And we don't say this enough, correct? And even at Coco, we strive for, we like, please innovate, correct? It's not that we don't have a lot of these things cut out or, built, correct? It's not that you need to use something which is out there, correct? You create yourself, you create your own data centers, and you are able to sort of like be able to do that. But you need to have some critical mass for all these things as well. I'll just say this. Sorry, that's my grouse of the season also, isn't it? I'm sure a lot of founders also feel the same way.
Very much, very much. Yeah.
What do you think, Guru? What do you think, Kriti? What?
Mentioned LLM when you were talking, like LLM, using LLM with the minimal resource. Is that more realistic? More like, how is it like more realistic using LLM with the minimal resources? People are talking more that LLM has been used with the minimal resources.
You mean building an LLM?
Yeah, building LLM with the minimal resources. Like, how is it more realistic?
So basically, you don't really need a very large number of resources to build a model that can cater to certain specific use cases. Let us say you're only dealing with legal documents, or, for example, to talk about what the
That's been our approach as well, isn't it?
correct.
Yeah.
So you don't really need a model that conquers the entire world. Just need to be able to understand the documents, try to solve the problems that we are working on. So with respect to resources, you don't really need a great number of resources, but the process itself is quite grueling.
Yeah.
You need to go through the data, collect it probably. It's because garbage in, garbage out. You have to clean it properly. You have to ensure that the document formatting is proper, etc. And then you need to train it. So we need some amount of GPU power to be able to train a model that does a decent job at giving you the right responses. Yeah.
So just to add that, Guru, we've taken an approach where we have specialist data sets. Like today, and some of these can be accessed as demo ones. Like we have all India Supreme Court cases.
Right.
We have legislation, correct? We have tax boards, FIMA boards, things like these that you can use to query very specific data sets, correct? And some of these come together, let us say, but to create a mini language model for a very specific task that you can potentially sort of like deploy on edge devices and things like these. Your iPhone 15 is quite capable of running some of these things as well, right? It's got enough computational power. Not that you lack any of these things today, it's just a use case, correct? And also, when a lot of these things come up and you have a large enough data set, and you also need to sort of, when you train an LM, you will need a combination of real data, synthetic data, and there are synthetic LLMs on it. It's also called as internally call it a bullshit LLMs because it's like completely synthetic data, correct? You're just generating random numbers, correct, for some of these things, right? So when you reach the scale when you have a language model where you want it to sort of train. I'll give an example, correct? Let us say you have in India, you have a backlog of millions of cases. People avoid court, correct? For what reason, Guru? You go there until you file when you are 20 and you get out when you are 60. I'm saying this. If you're lucky, correct? There are cases running for tens of years with no, it's because of a lack of trained cadre, lack of, in the sense that the number of judges may not be sufficient for the population, correct? And we follow a procedure which is not necessarily Indian; it's anglicized because we adopted a process when we were, when we were colonized, right? Or we were, for hundreds of years, correct? So there's a process that has come into this, which may not necessarily actually match the Indian ethos as well, correct? But let us say that you've got judgments or the thinking of 200 different judges over the last 200 years, correct? And you want to resolve this issue of cases, correct? We can train the LLM to exactly sort of like analyze cases the way, depending on the genre and other things, right? To be able to do this so that, the resolution, correct, for a case can come in a format, where, you may have a sitting judge or someone else who looks at it and is able to pass, the process, the documentation, if it is streamlined and you can have resolution in a matter of days versus 50, 60 years, right? So that is my thinking on this. But that is the ingenuity and that is the deep thought that is required for all of these things as well. I think as Coco, we are in a position to execute some of these things as well, but it also requires saying, is there political will to do this? Is there technological skill? And I'm evaluated by an LLM, can I, at the end of the day, you need a resolution. It is not necessarily a mediation that you require for some of these things as well. That's my thought process. Long-winded.
Yeah, in addition, there might be a few other limitations to local models is with respect to again the output, the window. How much you can actually get as an output cannot be. So if you are building smaller models, you will be getting smaller outputs. It may not be able to. That's one of the limitations that might be there for models that are.
Yeah, I'll give an example. Today, your judgments, just to add, is like 20, 25 pages long. The reason being you have to, justice has to be seen fair and not just sort of like be fair, right? So when you go through law school, some of these things come up where you have to be seen to be fair as well, correct? Like if the police intervene in a conflict, they are not going to immediately take sides. Have you noticed this? Because the police has to sort of like appear at least to be fair. They will never take sides immediately. And it has a process of its own, correct? So similarly on this. So one is when you're doing this data, it has to be clear of biases. India has a history where judges have been biased. Okay. You have judgments either which way and across, for whatever it is. If you put an LLM through a graphing program and see, and today we can map out, if you go before which judge, what is it that you can expect as a result, correct? That technology is available today. It does not require you. And that's how some of the litigation funds that invest, correct? Invest use this technology to figure out whether, they stand a chance if they pick up a piece of litigation, correct? And run it on its own or on its course, correct? So this technology is available, but we are just saying that access to justice has to be cheap. You have to solve major issues, correct? Which is the backlog of cases. And at the end, you want something that is enforceable, correct? Correct. And definitive. You don't want something that will drag on for 50 years, correct? And you are scared to go to the court. And this has been the problem for the last 100 years, correct? Now you have a real thing, deep technology where you can solve some of these things, correct? You have a commercial dispute, you don't have to go to court, correct? And I court to basically say, okay, I want to be paid, correct? For all of these things, that can be done very, very quickly. Traffic fines, correct? Now, our traffic fines code is very good. Correct. Now, people prefer to pay fines to the government rather than go and litigate. You can go and litigate a traffic fine thing, correct? Oh, it was unfair in coming and locking my bike up or car up or whatever the case is, right? When there is no road and you are forced to park there, you cannot come and lock it up. Basic common sense, fairness, correct? So these are things that require a fundamental outlook. I would think that AI in India is fantastic, especially in legal, is fantastic, isn't it, Guru?
Right.
You are able to solve so many things, so many inefficiencies. And one of the things that also, Kruti, when you use this, right, and when you clear it of bias, correct, AI doesn't take a side. We were on a demo recently, correct, not very long ago, where it basically said stuff on the financial side where I would have hesitated. Correct, isn't it? So it's like it's the most straightforward of things, It's emotionless as well. But at the end of the day, it's also going to tell you exactly what it thinks, and it never that's our original thinking. Will we get there is another thing altogether, correct? This can be used as an exploitative technology, or it can be used as a transformational technology, like any piece of technology that you have, right? At this point, the country is subject to exploitative technology, like dark stores, dark pricing, dark this, dark that. You've got competition commission coming in and doing all of these things. It's about time to really think about it as transformative technology, and we are very specific to India about this. And yes, I feel that I'm entitled to speak on some of these things as a practitioner as well, correct? And these are things that require you to I would think that I would use this at every village level, taluk level, district level, correct?
90% of the cases can just be solved in a few days, basically.
Yeah, it's like, there's an episode, my favorite series is Star Trek. No, there's one episode there in the original series called Blink of an Eye, correct? You can't see. They're accelerated humans, correct? And they will do things without you being able to see them, correct? So, it ends in a bad way in that particular episode, in the sense that, people figure out, the original crew figures out that, people are accelerated and they want to take on whatever those issues are. But in the wink of an eye, this was startup. So that is an apt thing, for solving, say, the case log in India, correct? No other country has this dubious distinction of having billion population and millions of unsolved cases, backlog, and you should do it, up to it, So anyway.
Right.
So adding on to that, so I have one question to ask. What do you think about what's your take on that? The perplexity and the OpenAI thing for $200. What's your take on this side?
Oh yeah, what do you think, Guru?
Yeah, first of all, it's too expensive, and with DeepSeek coming in.
So I see Perplexity was created as an alternative to Google, correct? But it still relies on Google search results to be able to give you, or maybe Bing and now DeepSeek to be able to give you. What it does is, if you run a query, this is my limited understanding, and the guy behind it is from IIT Madras, so you should clarify at some stage, but it'll run 20 different queries and then wait it out. Probably it has its own system of weights and biases, do all of these things, and then gives you summary. I've used it. I found, I have my own biases as well as to what my favorites are, correct, for all of these things. But, as a replacement to Google, you need to have a Google kind of search capability, correct? Even today, the default is still Google, and it may take it's like receiving an email which looks like an essay versus receiving an email that is like one sentence long. My bias is to look at one sentence long, correct? Not like an essay, correct? So this is how it looks like. When it comes to the O3 research, it's extremely priced, $200 to do PhD level kind of stuff. So is PhD going to stop tomorrow? Correct? I don't know the answer. I've tried out some of the reasoning models to repeatedly question itself to give, I have I've given it some very esoteric queries, and I've given it some very pointed queries. The pointed queries actually come out right. The philosophical and like what is the nature of the universe kind of question. It is not 42. If you remember the Hitchhiker's Guide, correct? Definitely not. Even there, it had deep thought, correct? So DeepSeek is like deep thought. It would give. I don't think that these are competing, but it's too expensive. If you're looking at a place like India for some of these things, I don't think so. And I don't think the Prime Minister needs to go out to sort of like get some of these technologies, correct? Should look at what's homegrown first, correct, to do all of these things as well. And necessarily homegrown technologies have grown with the limitations of the place as well, correct? So if you and India is at a fantastic stage where it can really grow some of these companies and these technologies, and it has a wide enough implication, sort out all of these things as well. Does Perplexity or O3 make a difference in India? I'm not particularly sure. What do you think, Guru?
Oh, in fact, not many people have that much money to spend on a monthly basis. Okay, if you want to do some research, okay, no. You generally spend 6 months or 1 year on doing research on a topic
Fair.
generally, and if something like this comes up, maybe it will make it faster. But more important for researchers is the effort that is involved in performing it, so that it drives the thought process, it refines the ideas, etc. Okay, there are two different conflicting comments here.
Yeah, it's like also the training given in schools, right? It's like, even schools today, in the higher levels, correct, still teach like, they don't teach Python, or they may teach Python, but it's more Java based than anything else, correct? In reality, it's just the opposite in the real world, isn't it? So, I think there is also a fundamental disconnect somewhere that needs to be. I mean, there are too many things that we can keep going on and on, but do those things really matter in India at this point in time? Probably not. If you really ask me, right? India has some very specific, use cases as well, and the services mindset certainly does not also help with product innovation. And product innovation, the copying is treated as product innovation to a large extent, correct? Actual innovation, I'm sure it does, but there's a lot of not too many, correct?
Yeah.
So and things like that. As an example, remember Guru sometime back, they built a new rocket motor, correct, which actually flew as well, based on some newer technologies than anything else. I forget the name of the company, correct? That was pure innovation, correct? And that was like, come on.
3D printed model.
Yeah, 3D printed module, which even I think ISRO had not yet gotten to that stage as yet, correct? And things like that. Some of those fundamental, I'm not saying no research gets done or it's only but on AI, you can hand count, who are the guys who are actually doing deep research in India, correct? So I think that's where things are. But go on, Kriti. Yeah.
So, one last question before we wrap up, sir. Like, what is this Kumbhakarna moment? Like, like people are talking about this. Like, what exactly that means, sir?
Let me rephrase that question. Okay, now till now we have heard about what Chetan thinks or what Guru thinks and things like that, right? Now you are exposed to AI right from sort of like right from college onwards, correct?
Yeah.
What do you think really? I mean, how do you use AI? Let me ask.
So basically, when I mean, as we have just passed, not really passed out, but as we, I mean, assignments, when they give the assignment, we just put the questions and we just get the answers. We are not like putting our efforts to literally go through the books and get the answers.
Okay.
So it's better to read that way. And also PDFs, and there's a thing in AI also where you put up a PDF and you get all the answers like related to the whole. You need not read the whole 30 pages.
Okay.
So it's like time consuming will be less again.
Okay.
So this is where we are using like.
So as an example, for this, right, the future generation looks at times. It's not necessary for you to learn everything, and then because each generation builds on top of the other, right? If you go back and try and build the Saturn rocket today, they don't even have the tools and dice, correct? And you don't even can you use that thing what they used, Guru, that before calculators came into thing. Well, I don't know.
Abacus and
No, they used some scale or something. I forget. See,
yeah.
Tractor and
no. They have this, to calculate log tables, right? They would do the anyway. Sorry, now look, even we don't remember some of these things, correct? Even though it may have been like a generation or two away, and you are at least 5 generations away or 4 generations away, correct? So things like these, why we say this is it's not necessary for you to actually you'd have a tool like this that remembers how things were done, correct? And then you have the tool to sort of look back, correct, and actually learn how it could be done if necessary and things like that. It's more of a memory tool, enhanced memory tool as well, correct? We've lost the art in India to manufacture mud buildings as an example, correct, which existed like 100 years before, correct, or for that matter, making iron which does not rust because of an alloy or whatever the case is, right? Use the iron pillar as an example, or the ability to create the stone temples in Karnataka, correct? You lost all that, but you have the ability now to store all of that generational stuff going forward, correct? So that means that you don't need to necessarily know Pythagoras theorem, correct? You should only know that, at the end of the day, you can tap into something that can utilize that. So you should have the broad aspects of it. And that's how exactly you should be using this, correct? It's not possible to download an entire LLM.
Basically, we need not spend that 15 for example, if we have a video for 15 minutes of time, we just put it on into some other this boards or something, we tell it to
And it's not necessarily to go through like 22, 23 years of education, correct?
Yes.
I think that seriously needs to get crunched at some stage as well, correct? To be able to say, you have a lot more. I mean, you may lack the experience, but that doesn't mean that you cannot tap into a higher experience thing, correct? Also, the way that generations are going to utilize this is to build stuff, correct, which would never have been attempted before, correct? At the end of the day, correct? If you are able to review a document in seconds versus you send it to email somebody, have somebody look into it, go through it, send you their comments with their biases and whatever it is, right? So it takes a lot of time, right? So you don't need some of those things anymore. And if you want to skill yourself, correct, you should be skilled in machine learning, as an example, because you can train models to do exactly what it is, right? Do you think that auto rickshaws, as is, which have existed for 75 years, will continue to be driven by humans in another 10 years? You got the technology today to do autonomous, like the way Tesla does, right? It's done as a combination of real time. Yeah. And because the technology is also improved, because you can do all that processing in real time, you don't need necessarily a cloud connection to do all of these things. You don't, so these are all the things, right, that you can do.
One click, they have this parking thing as well.
Yeah, and wouldn't you like a driverless auto rickshaw?
Yeah.
What do you think, Guru?
Yeah.
I for one, yeah. Now, can I account for all the auto rickshaw drivers who will gang up and say this is the wrong thing? I need a job for this because they're not prepped for this? Probably not.
Yes.
It's like the bank employees who resisted computerization, and today it turns out that the bank is the computer, correct? So, it is like that. So I'm saying
Bank is in a phone now.
the bank is a phone, at the end of the day, for all of these things as well. So, I mean, it's more of a philosophical discussion of human creativity and all of these things, but also human creativity is a subject of inherent bias, isn't it also? Correct, Guru. Can you grow out of the environment?
Whatever experiences that you have had till now, they transfer it over into like this.
Exactly, correct. So it's a subject matter of your learning, and it comes with its own, because you are also biological by nature. That means that you will also have a set of survival things kicking in, correct? It's not necessarily always going to be. So, if you look at system architecture, at the data stage, or how it can evolve beyond with all of these things, that's another thing which that's subject matter for another discussion. I think we've had some thoughts on it as well about how things can evolve
Back to Kumbhakarna moment.
Back to the Kumbhakarna moment. It's like the Indian government waking up, right, and thinking, oh, I need all these GPUs, and suddenly I have a lot of intellectual horsepower, correct, to be able to sort of. That's a wrong term. Horsepower is itself like outdated, correct? So, but anyway, anyway, I'm just you don't have the intellectual man or woman power today because of lack of skills. Yeah, but that's the Kumbhakarna moment where they wake up and figure out saying that the rest of the world is sort of like overtaken us.
Miles ahead.
And I'm still the services economy of 50, 70 years back. And I've not done anything to encourage innovation, correct? And that's the subject matter of so many other things, which is beyond the scope of this. But the Kumbhakarna moment is when the government is now inviting companies, correct, to basically say, create LLMs for us. Now, that is not followed by some deep thought as to what you will do with those LLMs in the first place, correct? When you're building something, you need to have like an end goal in mind. We've seen that. We call it the Kumbhakarna moment because, in the Ramayana, correct, you have Kumbhakarna who would sleep for how many years at a time? 12 years at a time or something, right? And he would wake up for 12 years and sleep for 12 years. Okay, and during that time, so many events would have changed, correct? That he was always lagging behind by 12 years, correct? That looks like the current state of affairs. And it's always been up to the private sector to take things forward. But, it's also a good thing that the Kumbhakarna has been woken up. Suddenly, out of all of these things and handing out freebies and other things, suddenly people figure out that going forward, it's going to become an existential issue of whether people are going to have the necessary skills or their jobs to be able to do all of these things. But from a technology perspective, at least they've woken up and said, okay, we want to do all of these things as well, correct? So I think it's a good step that they've taken. And hopefully, they will sort of like look into growing some of these things. It should have been done a long time back, correct? And in our own experience, when we tried to explain our company and AI to a lot of people as we were growing, and still are, correct? People don't understand or are at a skill level where they can really see how things can move, correct? So you have to really spend time, with them. And then suddenly it becomes like, oh, I'm going to lose my job. So I'm going to block this, correct? But I want my son or daughter to go abroad and work in Microsoft and make a lot of money. Now that conundrum has not been solved, that has not changed. All of that is going to stop. I think it's about time to sort of like focus on building apps, on using AI, on locally grown AI to make sense, correct? To do this. Now, do you need a bank do you think that AI today, correct? How long do you think it's going to take before my phone can talk to his phone and, basically sort of exchange money, data, whatever it is that is necessary? You don't need a central bank for any of these things. You don't need, at some point in time, there's a need for growing decentralization. Luckily for us, our central bank introduced the cryptocurrency equivalent of central bank. But where are the use cases? This is what we are saying, correct? You may introduce some forward thinking this, but it's not being taken by people because there's a lack of exposure and skill levels. Now, this seems controversial, but this is where it is, and it's not going to change overnight. It may change with some generational thinking and saying, okay, we are doing this to solve real issues, correct? But is it sufficient for me to sit today and say, I want to create a new LLM for India and then do what? Without having an end goal in mind, correct? I think this is where the gap is, correct? And if you have civil engineers who want to sort of like become testers, and if you have structural engineers, wanting to do software, then you know that there's a real services element which has really taken the economy in a very, very wrong direction, correct? So these are all things that we can talk about. People know but cannot solve. But with AI, you stand to have a real chance, isn't it? That is that's the way to adopt things. So, but thanks. as I said once again, this has been like a monologue because there are a lot of things that we wanted to cover, and a lot of the products that we mentioned, where I need to sort of like give some more clarity and things like that as well. Thanks, Kriti, for moderating this long session. Also, Guru, okay, for this, and for the team for getting this together.
Thanks for breaking it down for both of you, like Chetan and Guru. Like it was really insightful talking to you guys.
Yeah.
So,
The LLM is never going to call you sir. Okay. Or madam. Okay. So you can train it to call you that, but okay, that's an example of how it can be done. But thank you. Thanks so much.